He had a handshake that felt like a courtesy limp, quick, forgettable. The first time my son brought him home, I remember thinking that a man who shakes hands like he's apologizing for his own presence usually has a reason to apologize. But Claire loved him. And when your daughter loves someone, you learn to find things to appreciate. So I watched. I waited. And I kept my mouth shut. My name is not important right now. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I live on 11 acres outside Knoxville, Tennessee, and for 22 years I worked as a behavioral analyst for the FBI field office in Nashville. I read people for a living. I studied the gap between what people say and what their bodies confess when they think no one is paying attention. I retired quietly, moved back to the land my father left me, and started keeping bees. My neighbors know me as the old man who brings honey to the church potluck and fixes fences in the rain. My son-in-law, Derek, knew me as Claire's useless father who smelled like sawdust and never had anything interesting to say. That was fine with me. Derek sold commercial real estate. He drove a truck that cost more than most people's first homes, wore cologne I could smell from the driveway, and spoke about money the way some men speak about God with total, unquestioning reverence. He wasn't cruel at first. Rarely is. The cruelty comes in layers, like paint over rot. You don't see the damage until the surface starts to bubble. Claire was 31 when she married him. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and she had something her mother never fully had, a laugh that could fill a room without trying. I used to hear that laugh from the front porch. I noticed when it started getting quieter. It was small things first, the way it always is. She stopped wearing the earrings she used to love. She started finishing Derek's sentences before he could, preemptively agreeing with whatever he was about to say. She apologized constantly for the food temperature, for traffic, for the weather. I watched her make herself smaller in increments so fine that most people around her never noticed. But I had spent 2 decades watching people disappear in plain sight, and I recognized the shape of it. I said something to her once, carefully, gently, the way you approach a frightened animal you don't want to spook. She looked at me with that patient, tired smile and said, "Dad, Derek's just particular. You know how he is." And I let it go, because she was an adult, and because I knew that pushing would only close the door between us. The one thing I could not afford to lose was that she would still call me. That she would still know the door was open. Their son, Noah, was 4 years old. He had Derek's dark hair and Claire's laugh, and he was the kind of child who collects roly-poly bugs in his pockets and considers this entirely reasonable behavior. I kept a jar on my workbench just for him. Every time he visited, we'd add to it. Creatures, he called them. He was 4 years old, and he called them his creatures, and I would have walked through fire for that boy without pausing to check if I had the right shoes on. The night it happened was a Wednesday in November, cold enough that I'd already banked the wood stove before 9. I was reading one of those histories of the Korean War that I keep meaning to finish, and never do, and my phone lit up on the side table at 11:47. It was Claire. She never called that late. We had an understanding about late-night calls. They meant something was wrong. I answered before the second ring. What I heard on the other end of the line was not Claire's voice. It was something quieter than her voice, something that lived underneath it. It was the voice a person uses when they are very afraid and trying very hard not to show it to someone nearby. "Daddy," she said. Just that one word. The way she said it, barely above a breath, all the air gone out of it, told me everything that word needed to tell me. I was already sitting up. "I hear you, sweetheart. I'm right here." A pause. I could hear something in the background. A television, I thought at first. Then I understood it wasn't a television. "Noah's asleep," she said quietly. "He's upstairs. He's fine." She was telling me this before I could ask, which meant she had thought about what I would need to know. That level of presence, that careful thinking ahead, in the middle of whatever was happening around her, that told me something about how long she had been living this way. You don't get that calm without practice. "Okay," I said. "Is there a reason you're whispering?" Another pause. Shorter this time. "He's having a hard night," she said. I closed the book. I set it on the table. I stood up slowly because my left knee has opinions about cold weather, and I walked to the hook by the door where my jacket hangs, and I took it down. "Claire," I said, "I need you to listen to me. Are you safe right now, in this exact moment?" "I think so," she said. And then, very quietly, as though she wasn't sure she was allowed to say it out loud. "I don't know how much longer." "I'm coming," I said. "Do not hang up. Put the phone in your pocket if you need to, but don't hang up." She lived 26 minutes from my property under normal conditions. It was nearly midnight on a Wednesday in November, and the county roads between us were empty and black, and I covered that distance in 19 minutes. I know because I checked the time when I pulled off her road and parked 30 yards short of the driveway, behind the stand of cedar trees, at the property line, engine off. I had already called the county sheriff's dispatch before I was out of my driveway. I gave them the address, my name, my former federal credentials, and a calm description of what I knew and what I suspected. The dispatcher, a young woman who kept her voice steady and professional throughout, told me units were en route and would arrive within 15 to 20 minutes. I told her I understood, and that I would not go inside until I had assessed the situation from the exterior. I told her I had Claire on the other line, and would relay any change in status. She said, "Sir, please wait for the units." I said, "I understand." I did not tell her what I was actually going to do. There is a difference between lying to a dispatcher and simply not providing information that hadn't been requested. I sat in that car for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because I was counting, running the kind of slow internal count that keeps your heart rate down when every instinct you have is telling you to move. I listened to the sounds coming through the phone in my jacket pocket. Claire had done exactly what I asked, tucked it away, kept the line open. I could hear the muffled geography of her house. The kitchen, I thought. She was near the kitchen. Then I heard Derek's voice. I am not going to tell you what he said to her. I will tell you that it was the kind of language that a man uses when he has decided that the person in front of him is his property, and that property doesn't have the right to talk back. I will tell you that it was not the first time he had said those things, because a man does not speak to his wife with that particular fluency unless he has had a great deal of practice. And I will tell you that I heard my daughter's voice answer him, quiet, careful, trying to keep the temperature down, and I heard the change in her voice when that stopped working. I got out of the car. I have been trained in threat assessment, in de-escalation, in the measured application of force, and in the precise calibration of presence that law enforcement uses to enter a volatile situation and change its temperature. I walked to that house the way I was trained to walk, purposefully, without rushing, aware of every point of entry and every light in every window. I rang the doorbell. There was a silence inside the house that had a very specific texture to it, the sudden, held breath quality of two people who have just been interrupted by the outside world intruding on something they thought was private. Then footsteps. Derek opened the door. He was in a white undershirt, a glass in his right hand that was not his first of the night, and he had the particular look that a man gets when his blood is up, and someone has just inconveniently reminded him that he exists within a society that has opinions about his behavior. He looked at me standing on his porch at midnight in my barn jacket, and I watched the contempt arrange itself across his face like furniture he'd set out many times before. "Are you serious right now?" he said. Not a question, a statement of irritation. "Is Claire home?" I said, "It's midnight, old man." He said old man the way people say it when they mean something else entirely. "Whatever this is, it can wait until Derek." I said his name the way I used to say the names of subjects in an interview room. Flat, even. A word that doesn't rise or fall. A word that lands like a hand on a table. "I'd like to see my daughter." He stared at me. I have been stared at by men considerably more frightening than Derek, and I have learned that the quality of a man's stare tells you more about his fear than his anger. What I saw in his eyes, underneath the irritation and the contempt, was the very early flicker of something he hadn't expected to feel, standing in his own doorway. He didn't know what it was yet. He just knew that something wasn't adding up the way it was supposed to. "Claire," he called, not taking his eyes off me. "Your father's here." The way he said father had quotation marks around it that only I was meant to hear. She appeared at the end of the hallway. She was holding her right elbow with her left hand, the way people do when they're trying not to show you something. She had changed her shirt recently. I noticed that. She noticed that I noticed. "Dad," she said. "You didn't have to. Come outside with me for a minute," I said. "I want to show you something on the truck." It was a thin excuse, and all three of us knew it. But it was an exit, and Claire knew what an exit looked like. She moved toward the door. Derek put his arm across the doorframe. "She's not going anywhere," he said. And there it was. The moment when a man reveals to you, without any ambiguity, exactly who he is and exactly what he believes. I looked at his arm across the doorframe. I looked at him. I said, very quietly, "Derek, I need you to move your arm." "Or what?" he said, and he smiled. The smile of a man who has never in his life had a reason to reconsider this kind of decision. I have thought since then about what I should tell you about what happened next, and I have decided that the truth is the only thing worth telling. I am 63 years old, and I have a bad left knee, and I go to bed before 10 on most nights, and I keep bees, and I bring honey to the church potluck. I am also a man who spent the first half of his adult life in environments where the difference between reading a situation correctly and reading it incorrectly was the difference between going home and not going home. The human body does not forget what it has learned at that level. It holds the knowledge in a different place than memory. It holds it somewhere closer to reflex. I did not hurt Derek. I want to be precise about that. What I did was remove the obstacle he was presenting, control the situation, and create the space my daughter needed to exit the house. I did it in a manner that was efficient, that was proportionate, and that left Derek with nothing injured except his understanding of who he had been dealing with for the past 4 years. He sat down on the porch steps, more out of shock than anything else, and he looked up at me with an expression I have seen before, on the faces of men who have just discovered that the world is not arranged the way they believed it was. "Claire," I said, "go get Noah." She went. I crouched down in front of Derek, my bad knee protesting eloquently, and I looked at him at eye level. Behind us, through the trees, I could see the first sweep of headlights coming up the county road, right on schedule. "I've been watching you for 4 years," I said. "I've been quiet because Claire needed me to be. That's over now." I kept my voice conversational. This was not a threat. This was information. The people coming up that road are going to want to talk to you. I'd encourage you to be truthful with them. I retired from 22 years of federal behavioral analysis, and I am going to give them every observation I have documented about the pattern of your behavior in this household. You should know that." He opened his mouth. "You don't need to say anything to me right now," I said. "I just wanted you to understand the situation clearly." 2 county sheriff's units pulled into the driveway. I stood up knee and all, and I walked back to the door and held it open as Claire came down the stairs with Noah wrapped around her, his dark hair against her shoulder, his eyes closed, entirely asleep and entirely unaware of anything that had happened around his small and perfect life. She stopped in front of me, and she looked at me for a moment, and I saw in her face something I had not seen there in longer than I could remember. It wasn't relief exactly. It was more like recognition, like someone who has been walking in the wrong direction for a long time, and has finally turned around, and can see where home actually is. "He used to tell me you were just an old man who talked to bees," she said. "I do talk to bees," I told her. That part was accurate. She almost laughed. It wasn't quite the laugh yet, not the room-filling one I remembered from the porch, but it was the beginning of it. It was the shape of it, and that was enough for that night. I gave my statement to the deputies. I gave them everything, the phone call, the timestamps, what I had heard through the open line, what I had observed at the door, what had happened on the porch. I gave them the dates I could remember from the past 2 years, the holidays when Claire had looked wrong, the time she'd canceled visits without explanation, the gradual architecture of a woman making herself disappear. One of the deputies, a woman about Claire's age, wrote everything down with the careful thoroughness of someone who had taken this kind of statement before and understood exactly what it meant. Derek was taken in for questioning that night. The events that followed the protective order, the documentation process, the long and unglamorous machinery of holding someone accountable took months, not minutes. I am not going to pretend to you that it was fast, or clean, or satisfying in the way that the movies make you expect these things to be. It was slow, and it was paperwork, and it was Claire sitting across from lawyers and recounting things she had never told anyone out loud, and it was some very hard mornings. But she did it, every single piece of it. Noah stayed with me for 6 weeks while Claire got her feet under her. Every morning he would wake up before I did, and I would find him already in the workbench shed, checking on his creatures. He had a small flashlight he was deeply serious about, and he would shine it into the jar and conduct what I can only describe as a thorough professional assessment of each individual roly-poly bug. "They're okay, Grandpa," he would tell me. I checked. "Good," I would say. "That's good." I want to tell you something about what I've been sitting with since that night. I've thought about the 4 years of watching. The silences I held and the words I didn't say, and the visits where I saw something and looked away because Claire was an adult, and it wasn't my place and I didn't want to push. And I want to be honest with you about that, because I think some of you are sitting in that exact position right now, watching someone you love make herself smaller, watching and waiting and telling yourself it's not your place. I don't have a clean answer for you. I got lucky that Claire called. Some daughters don't call. Some of them go quiet in a different way, and there is no 11:47 phone call with a held breath voice on the other end. Some of the people watching this right now were Claire, and nobody came. I know that. And if that's you, I want you to hear me say that it was not because you didn't deserve someone to come. It was not because you weren't worth the 19-minute drive. The fault in those stories lies entirely with the person who created a situation where leaving felt more dangerous than staying. Fear is not weakness. Fear is the rational response to a real threat. It took me 22 years of behavioral science to understand that, and it took Claire 4 years of marriage to live it in ways I'll never fully understand. She has her own place now, 13 minutes from my property. She hung curtains the color of goldfinches, and she bought a kitchen table with 4 chairs because she told me she intends to fill them. Noah has his own jar on his own shelf, and he has begun a careful, ongoing census of every crawling creature within range of that yard. He tells me his numbers weekly. I take the reports very seriously. Last month, Claire called me on a Tuesday evening, not an emergency, just a call. She called to tell me that she had signed up for a self-defense class at the Y, and that her instructor was a retired Army sergeant who, she said, reminded her a little bit of me. Is that a compliment? I asked her. She's terrifying and competent, and she doesn't tolerate nonsense, Claire said. That's definitely a compliment, I said. She laughed. The room feeling kind. I was on my front porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the end of November move through the trees, and my daughter laughed, and it was exactly the sound I had been holding space for. I've been turning something over in my mind that I want to leave you with tonight. When Derek looked at me in that doorway, he thought he was looking at an old man who kept bees and smelled like sawdust and had nothing interesting to say. He thought he knew exactly what I was. And in a way, he wasn't wrong. I am all of those things. I am genuinely an old man who keeps bees. But a person is not only what they show you. A person is the sum of every year they've lived and everything they've survived and every choice they've made in quiet rooms that no one else ever saw. Derek made the mistake of thinking that quiet meant empty. I have one question I want to leave you with before I go, and I really do want to know what you think, so I hope you'll tell me in the comments. If you had been standing at the end of my daughter's hallway that night, if you had been the parent on the other end of that phone call, what would you have done? Would you have waited for the units like the dispatcher asked? I want to know. Tell me down below. And if you're watching this and you're still in it, still in a house that feels like Claire's house, still making yourself smaller, still hoping the next version of the promise is the one that finally holds, I want you to know that the door is not locked from the outside, and there are people who will make the 19-minute drive. You are worth the drive. Thank you for listening tonight, friends. You always are. The quietest people in the room are sometimes the ones who have seen the most. Walter never announced himself, never wore his history on his sleeve, and that patience, that willingness to stay present without forcing, is what kept the door open long enough for Claire to call. If someone you love is going quiet in ways that worry you, keep the door open. Just keep it open. That alone can be everything. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of meaningful entertainment while carrying a lesson worth holding on to.